The Vampire Diaries was a hit show that aired on the CW and centered around a love triangle between its three main characters, Elena, girl next door Gilbert, and two vampires who are brothers. But the real MVP of this series is Katherine Pierce. Without Katherine's shenanigans and tribulations, the show's main love triangle and life or death dramas wouldn't exist. But that's not the only reason. Katherine is easily a fan favorite. As you can see, Katherine looks exactly like the show's main character, Elena. It's because they are doppelgangers, and I'm not going to get into the show's lore about that. Just know that they're from the same bloodline, born centuries apart. Season 1 Katherine was your basic run-of-the-mill femme fatale. Told from the Salvatore brothers' point of view, she was a one-note seductress that was, in my opinion, boring and tired. But once season 2 came and we got more backstory from her point of view, I knew that Katherine was my spirit animal. What I relate to on a deep level is Katherine's why. Katherine operates on what I call the trauma mind. There are other characters on this show alone that I could use to illustrate this concept. But I love Katherine. She's the main reason why I kept watching the show long after Elena became uninteresting. What is the trauma mind? It's a term I use to describe a specific mindset. To me, it encapsulates a phenomenon I've experienced, helps me understand it, and has helped bring awareness of its hold over me. I made this term up because I'm not sure if there's a term for it, and if there is, I haven't seen it. First, let's define trauma. Wikipedia defines it as damage to the mind that occurs as a result of a distressing event. An overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or integrate emotions involved with that experience. On a website called Medical News Today, defines 3 different types of trauma. There's acute, and that means a single event like a car accident, a natural disaster, medical condition, or a type of community violence. There's chronic, that's repeated or prolonged exposure, like bullying or domestic abuse. And then there's complex, and that's exposure to multiple traumatic events. I'd also like to add that people react to trauma differently. 2 people could experience the same exact trauma at the same exact time and react to it differently in a psychological and a physiological sense. One person could have PTSD and the other could not. From the perspective of the body and its processing of traumas, no one trauma is worse than another. I'm saying this because there shouldn't be judgment in how one person reacts to a trauma or their ability to cope with it. If trauma processing was predictable and formulaic, then there would be a set cure for it in the psychological community. But there isn't just one path to process it, and in my opinion, there's still trial and error ways of healing it. I would just like to make it clear that being triggered and the trauma mind are 2 different things. I'm also going to cite The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk and Healing Trauma by Peter Levine. They talk heavily about trauma processing with solutions, and most of what I've learned about healing and trauma is from these books. In any traumatic situation, your body and brain goes into fight or flight mode for survival. The trauma mind is when your brain stays in fight or flight mode even after the immediate danger is gone. Essentially, it doesn't turn off and your body still believes that you are still in danger, and it operates as if you are. Survival first and everything else comes second. Everything else being your desires, interests, health, relationships. Everything else is a footnote. A traumatic incident usually involves a situation that has overwhelming odds of survival. Your very survival is threatened and you're helpless or powerless in doing something about it. You can't trust anything except for your survival instinct. It's a situation that makes you feel small and powerless and alone. You are the cornered underdog in this situation. On a physiological level, Cortisol and adrenaline is released at high levels, and after the trauma is over and it is processed, usually those levels will go back down to your normal resting state. But in the trauma mind, it doesn't return back to your normal resting state. It's still elevated to some degree. It's a great mindset to have when you are in such a position of danger, say an abusive relationship, or at war, or in a horrible car accident. But the problem is when you stay in that mindset long after the threat has gone away. All of your decisions and choices are still coming from this survival mode, and there's little room for anything else. Trauma mind is essentially being stuck in the fight or flight mode, being stuck in the mode of thinking that you are not safe. For whatever reason, your body hasn't finished processing the emotions and the stress that came with the trauma. This is your brain on trauma.
I don't want to die. Please.
Let's talk about Katherine and her traumas. Born in the 1400s in Bulgaria, Katerina Petrova, sorry if I messed that up, was an out-of-wedlock pregnant teenager. Because it would damage the family's name and ruin her chances of marrying well, the baby was taken from her. She was then exiled from her family to England. These two events could qualify as trauma, but I would say that Katherine is able to bounce back from these events pretty well. It's here in England that Katherine sees herself as a survivor. It's something she repeats again and again. But here, it's in a social sense. She has to assimilate in a new country with their customs and their language. Katherine realizes how resourceful and adaptable she is. This is no small feat for a time when women have to rely on social status and marriage to be successful in life. And she sees herself as winning when two wealthy brothers show an interest in her. Klaus and Elijah, the Michelson brothers. Instead of marrying well and living happily ever after, she learns that these brothers are only interested in using her blood for a ritual sacrifice. In this moment, Katherine's operating on a different level of survival. It's life or death. It's fight or flight time. She flees. It's here that her primitive brain is activated, and there's only one rule in the primitive brain when it comes to survival. It's not rational or moral, it's just animal instinct. And this is Katherine's new motto. This is where Katherine enters the trauma mind and is never able to shake it off. Trapped in a corner, helpless and alone, Katherine does whatever it takes for her to survive. She kills herself with vampire blood inside her system so that she could turn into a vampire, rendering her blood useless for the ritual. She now has to kill people in order to survive for the rest of her undead life. But for Katherine, that's a small price to pay.
Better you die than I.
After escaping her captors, she discovers that Klaus have killed her family in retaliation. Katherine is alone in the world. She literally is the only person she can ever rely on. So she does.
Because when Klaus shows up to kill us all, and he will, I'll be in the tomb where no vampire will enter because they can't get out. I'll be the safest psychotic bitch in town.
We're going to cover the rest of her actions as an example of the trauma mind. From here on out, Katherine's storyline is dominated by her trauma mind. All her actions and motivations stem from this. She goes between offering Klaus a deal, hiding from Klaus, or finding ways of destroying him first. Katherine doesn't have friends. She has favors, people who owe her. And that's how she survives. If you haven't seen the show, I'm about to spoil a lot of the mystery in season 2 and a few surprises in the seasons after. Katherine makes her way to America and befriends a witch that helps her stay in the daylight and to move from town to town without people becoming too suspicious of what she is. When Katherine gets to Mystic Falls, She finds an opportunity to stage her own death so that Klaus will believe she is gone and will stop searching for her. The town knows about vampires and wants to get rid of them. But being shrewd and using her allies in secret deals, Katherine is able to escape, but to make everyone else believe that she perished with the rest of the vampires. That is, until the brother who loved her too much finds out the truth. Katherine's mind games with the Salvatore brothers essentially ends up biting her in the butt.
Why are you standing there? That is a girl who clearly wants to be chased. If you don't do it, I will.
Damon, the eldest Salvatore brother, was so in love with her that he tries to resurrect her, only to discover she was never there. She was living her best life somewhere else without him and stalking the brother who didn't love her enough. Now outed that she wasn't actually dead, Katherine has to come up with another scheme to get Klaus off her back. She returns to Mystic Falls to get the ingredients to Klaus's ritual to offer that on a silver platter in exchange for her freedom. Because now Elena, the next doppelganger, has the blood that Klaus needs to complete his ritual.
You have the betrothal fire.
For a minute, it seems like Katherine is able to work with our main characters in order to fend Klaus off and keep all of them safe. But she can't trust anyone. Remember, it goes back to their original trauma. Elijah, Klaus's brother, and Tristan, one of their flunkies, both tried to save Katherine from Klaus, and they failed. Katherine is unable to put her life in anyone else's hands. She has to betray the main characters. But that backfires, and she's captured by Klaus. She makes a barter with Damon Salvatore, and the first chance she has to flee, she does. In season 3, she teams up with the main characters again to try to get rid of Klaus and his family. I'll get into why she inadvertently sabotages that later. In season 4, she betrays our main characters yet again to steal the cure of vampirism in the hopes of exchanging it to Klaus for her freedom. She ends up not making that deal in the hopes of proving something else, and I will get into that later as well. Her last-ditch effort is finding information on Klaus that distracts him. Klaus is out of the picture and onto his own TV show. For all intensive purposes, Katherine is free, but her mind isn't. The trauma mind is an extreme coping mechanism, but it's not a healthy way to live. The same mindset that has helped save her in many, many predicaments will also be her downfall. It's here that I want to focus on Katherine's romantic obsession with Stefan and romantic interest in Elijah. But first I want to talk about what happens when the mind hides away pain and stress of the trauma somewhere else in your psyche. The problem is that it hides parts of you away with that pain, parts of you that are holding on to that pain. For instance, a naive farm girl who dreams of true love or yearns to be reunited with her daughter. The pain of losing your child is attached to the desire to be with that child. The pain of being betrayed and hunted by a possible romantic interest makes Katherine, let's say, emotionally unavailable. It buries her desire of being in an open, intimate relationship where she can be vulnerable, along with the pain of having been vulnerable and then disappointed, betrayed, and almost killed. Goodbye, romantic farm girl. Essentially, you are rejecting the part of you that carries the attached trauma. For the purposes of this theory, when that happens, you are no longer whole. But the psyche yearns for wholeness. If you've hidden or rejected parts of you, whether due to trauma or insecurity or just plain socialization, you will always somehow run back into them. The trauma mind has two very strong conflicting desires. One being fight or flight from the trauma and continue doing so, and the other is processing the trauma so you can return back to your whole self. In Katherine's case, it's the farm girl trying to find her way back to Katherine, and there are two men on the show who help remind her of what she once was. Stefan.
I kiss you, and I know that I'm falling in love.
And Elijah.
Life is too cruel. If we cease to believe in love, why would we want to live?
It's a common misconception for people with trauma or insecurities to think if they're with someone, then they will be loved, then they will be whole, then they would be worthy. But it's backwards. You have to give that to yourself first, instead of hoping another person's presence or acceptance of you leads you to give those things to yourself. Therein lies the cause of attraction. If Elijah can look at her that way again, or if Stefan loves her, then maybe she can be that farm girl again, her true self, and get that part back. Maybe she can be whole again.
If I change, if I can prove to you that I'm worth loving, maybe someday I'll be that girl for you again.
I'd also like to note that it's not an uncommon coping mechanism to become the thing that traumatized you. Katherine's manipulation of the Salvatore brothers echoes the Michelson brothers' manipulation of Katherine's romantic naivete. Another way the trauma mind affects relationships, especially if the trauma is due to a relationship, is for you to repeat that dynamic in the hopes that it will turn out differently this time. This is just another way for the psyche to achieve wholeness. Another way for the trauma to be processed and healed. But it usually doesn't end up differently. It usually ends up playing out exactly the way it originally played out. Because again, the processing and the healing has to come from within you and within the body. Katherine is attracted to men who will betray her and whom she cannot fully depend on or trust. And even if they were trustworthy, Katherine's incapable of trusting anyone else.
You trust too easily.
And you run from it. And see that right there, that's our divide.
But she also dates men that she uses and objectifies. And they too also betray her. In season 3, the main characters, along with Katherine, came up with a plan to kill Klaus. The plan was to get Klaus and his father in the same vicinity so that Klaus's father, who is a vampire hunter, can kill Klaus. But if that didn't work, they had a backup plan, and that was for Damon to kill Klaus with a white oak stake. Even if the catch-22 would be Damon dying along with him, but Katherine is the one who foils the plan B by getting Stefan to stop it. Katherine saved Damon's life over the destruction of Klaus. Let me say that again. She gave up on getting rid of her tormentor once and for all. For Damon, the guy she disrespected throughout the whole series. Why? Because she didn't want to hurt Stefan.
Why would you risk all that just to save Damon's life?
I wasn't just trying to save Damon's life, Stefan. I was trying to save yours.
The boy that reminds her of her true sense of self that she lost a long time ago. Now, this might sound like it goes against the trauma mind, because the trauma mind means survival over everything else. But it's also part of your trauma mind for certain parts of you to try to come back. And that's what happens here with Katherine. Knowing that Stefan would be devastated and lost without his brother is enough for Katherine to go against the survival mode. See, the act of saving Stefan's innocent and romantic self is an act of saving the farm girl. It's not necessarily selfless.
Humanity is a vampire's greatest weakness. No matter how easy it is to turn it off, it just keeps trying to fight its way back in. Sometimes I let it.
In season 4, Katherine gets in a relationship with Elijah and hopes that if she gives him the cure to give to Klaus, that Elijah can talk some sense into Klaus so that he will leave Katherine alone. When Elijah hears of the plan and feels like he's being used, which is fair, Katherine says,
I don't even remember who I was when we first met, and I want to find out.
She gives him the cure to prove that she could be the girl she once was, and not a manipulative backstabber. Elijah won't make that deal for her, and she's back to square one on her own. Katherine finds out that Klaus may have fathered a child. She lets him know, and Klaus forgets about his doppelganger blood ritual and leaves the town and the show. With Klaus off her back, it's here that Katherine focuses on returning to the girl she once was, first through Elijah.
Leave him to set off on this new adventure, and let's you and I go out on ours.
Elijah declines. So Katherine's interest in Stefan and Elijah is her psyche trying to reunite with the farm girl she locked away in order to play the survival chess game with Klaus. It's her desire to be whole again. It's just that she's going about it the wrong way. I also think it's why she's intensely jealous of Elena, because Elena has kept most of her vulnerability when faced with the similar horrors that Katherine was put through. That, and she has Stefan's love. Katherine could have just left by herself, led her best life, lived many, many more years. But she stays when Bonnie promises another level of immortality. Why would Katherine want this, though? The only person she fears is Klaus, and he's out of the picture. Answer? The trauma mind. If Katherine had a therapist, they may remind her that she is safe now. She doesn't need to plot, scheme, or get any more legs up on her tormentor. Dealing and processing these traumas is the only true way of being free and feeling safe. It's the only way back. That if she wants to return to what she once was, she will have to process the pain of her past traumas. But this is all that Katherine knows, is to be an impervious, all-powerful monster. She has to settle for this because she thinks the door to having that farm girl back is closed. It's this unconscious desire to be whole again and not recognizing the proper way of doing that, which becomes the end of Katherine. Bonnie's ambition succeeds her ability, and Bonnie dies, unable to deliver. Frustrated, Katherine takes it out on the one person who has what Katherine doesn't know how to get back.
What are you doing? What do you believe? I'm having a bad day.
Elena bests Katherine by forcing the cure of vampirism down her throat, rendering Katherine more vulnerable than ever as a human. Katherine still has a chance. In season 5, she is reunited with her long-lost daughter. They could have run away together. Her daughter, who is a vampire, could have protected her. They could have been a fearsome mother-daughter duo, kicking ass, taking names, breaking hearts, solving crimes, having mukbangs, going to antique road shows. There's just so much fun that could have been had there. She's drained most of her blood for the cure, which then causes her to age. She's dying of old age. She gives up knowing that Stefan will never love her how she wants him to.
You'd never look at me the way you look at Elena, would you?
But when Stefan shows her a little bit of attention, Katherine thinks she has a chance, so she sticks around. for Stefan, aka the mirror of her former self, which sadly is more important than the reunion with her daughter.
We will be together again.
But she still has another way out. Her daughter has found a way for Katherine's soul to jump to another person's body. They call it traveling. She could have picked anybody. Become a vampire again. Forever be hidden from Klaus. Katerina and Nadia could have had their own spin-off. The Pierces take Manhattan. I'd watch it. But that wouldn't be in line with her true goal, the way back to her former self. She thinks she needs Stefan's love for that. She doesn't want just anybody. She wants Elena's body, because Elena could get what she never could, Stefan's heart. But Stefan doesn't want Elena's body. If that's all he wanted, then he would have just reunited with Katherine. So Katherine manipulates and seduces instead of being vulnerable and authentic, which is why Stefan could never fall in love with her in the first place. He is suspicious. Katherine is found out, her daughter is killed and used as bait, and that is when Katherine is killed by Stefan and sent to literal hell. Katherine comes back in the finale and is literally the devil now. The farm girl is forever gone, as well as Katherine's desire for her to return. All she can see is red, is revenge. There is no way back for her, ever. Of course, the one that ends her once and for all is the one she wanted most of all. The one who she thought could return her to her former self. Another echo of the original betrayal and trauma of the simple farm girl who wanted to be close to someone and it ended her.
Klaus won't be able to walk away from this. He and I are the same. We manipulate, we thirst for power, we control, we punish, but our actions are driven by one singular place deep inside.
And what's that?
We're alone. And we hate it.
I hope all that made sense. Trauma is still a phenomenon the psychology community is still trying to define and find the best course of treatment for. Please feel free to comment on this video on trauma or Katherine Pierce in the comment section below. Thank you.